Leadership's not really for women like her, my manager said, his voice dripping with lazy confidence through the thin conference room wall. I froze mid-step, holding my coffee like a prop in a play I hadn't auditioned for. She's reliable, he continued, chuckling, but she's not visionary. You know how they are. Great with details, not big-picture thinkers. There was a faint laugh from whoever was on the call with him, then the rustle of papers, then silence. Just long enough for me to realize that I wasn't supposed to hear any of it. But I did. Every word. I stood there for a few seconds, watching the condensation slide down my coffee cup. I should have walked away. I should have shrugged it off like every other time he'd made a small, cutting remark. But something about the way he said women like her lodged itself under my ribs like a splinter I couldn't ignore. I turned, walked back to my desk, and sat down. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, pretending to type. On my monitor, my reflection stared back at me. Tired, controlled, small. That was the morning something cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically. Quietly. Like a bridge giving way under years of quiet weight. If you're still watching at this point, do yourself a favor. Tap subscribe and like. Because if you've ever been underestimated, this story is for you. Back to that moment. My name's Amy, and I'd been at Stratus Dynamics for 6 years. I wasn't flashy, I wasn't loud, but I got results. Consistent ones. The kind that didn't make headlines, but built empires. My boss, Gregory Steele, loved results. As long as they had his name on them. When I joined, he'd been the golden boy of the company. Charismatic, quick with buzzwords. The kind of man who turned networking into performance art. People said he could sell sunlight to the desert. What they didn't say was that he sold other people's work as his own. And me? I was his favorite product. For years, I'd been the quiet hand behind the deals he bragged about. I wrote the onboarding frameworks, managed client transitions, and handled fires that would have burned through the company if I hadn't stayed late, unpaid, fixing them. He'd call it teamwork. But the team was me and my insomnia. Still, I stayed. Because that's what you're told to do, right? Keep your head down. Work hard. Be patient. Recognition will come. Except it doesn't. It was around that same time that Greg started preparing his Q4 miracle, as he called it. He'd been working on a big deal with 3 of our top-tier clients, Vection Labs, Atlas Core, and Meridian Biotech. Deals I had built from scratch. Every presentation deck, every client correspondence, every forecast had my fingerprints all over it. But when Greg sent the summary reports to the executive board, my name was gone. Replaced with team lead Gregory Steele. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I'd learned that silence was my sharpest weapon. It let me listen, observe, document. Because what Greg didn't know was that while he was practicing his leadership monologues, I was building a different kind of presentation, one he'd never get to rehearse. The first file I created was titled December Portfolio Backup. Innocent enough. Inside it, I started saving everything. Original drafts, time-stamped edits, meeting notes, even the Slack messages where he delegated my work back to himself. Then I created another folder. Private. Offline. Encrypted. Its name? Northwind. Because if he thought I was a harmless breeze, he had no idea what kind of storm was coming. A week later, I was in the break room when I overheard Greg again, this time bragging to the CFO's assistant. Next quarter, we're scaling to $25 million in renewals. I've restructured client engagement completely. I nearly laughed out loud. I had restructured it. I sipped my coffee and listened. He kept talking, his tone casual but arrogant. Honestly, once we close Vection, I'll hit my bonus cap. Probably around $900,000. No, wait, $980,000. That number stuck. $980,000. Nearly $1 million. Earned on the back of my work. My weekends, my patience. That was when the quiet fracture became a fault line. From that day on, I documented everything. Every modified file, every email sent from his account that mirrored mine. Every call recap he forwarded to leadership under his name. I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. Cold. Greg was too busy celebrating his own genius to notice that the very structure holding up his empire was shifting beneath him, one spreadsheet at a time. By December, his visionary leadership had become the company's favorite success story. Posters, interviews, even a LinkedIn spotlight. And me? I smiled, clapped during meetings, and nodded through his fake humility. But in the privacy of my apartment, I was preparing something else. Something final. Because leadership, I realized, isn't about who talks the loudest. It's about who builds quietly and knows when to walk away. And the morning Greg got his $980,000 bonus, I was ready to do exactly that. To walk away and leave behind the kind of truth that doesn't need to shout to destroy a man. When people picture revenge, they imagine shouting, slam doors, maybe a dramatic resignation speech that goes viral on LinkedIn. Mine started with something far less cinematic, a spreadsheet. It was a gray Monday morning in November when I opened a blank Excel file and typed the title, Client Attribution Overview. No one in the office would have blinked. Data sheets were my specialty. Greg used to call me the spreadsheet whisperer when he wanted something fixed before his next presentation. I didn't smile anymore when he said it. Each row on that sheet represented one thing Greg had stolen. Projects, clients, initiatives, ideas. I began filling in the details. Column A, client name. Column B, deal size. Column C, original project lead. Column D, presentation credits. Column E, evidence. By noon, I already had 12 rows filled. At first, I just wanted to protect myself. To make sure if something went wrong, I had proof. But the deeper I went, the clearer it became. Greg's entire reputation was built on lies. It started small. A client named Atlas Corp had sent him an email thanking me for helping them streamline their reporting system. Greg forwarded that same email to the executive team. Except he'd edited it. My name was gone. Then there was Meridian Biotech. I'd written the onboarding strategy and coordinated with their IT lead through countless 2 a.m. messages. When Greg presented the results at a board meeting, he said, "My team developed an innovative rollout framework." My team. That sentence hit harder than any insult. Because there was no team. Just me. If you're still watching, you probably know that feeling. The quiet, nauseating realization that someone's been taking credit for your life's work. That's where the story really begins to turn. Because after that day, I stopped reacting. I started collecting. I made copies of project decks before Greg finalized them. I archived client call transcripts, forwarded emails to my personal inbox, and kept an offline folder on a password-protected drive. I wasn't planning an expose. I was documenting a crime scene. Around that time, HR started sending out performance check-ins, harmless on the surface. But after 6 years, I knew what they meant. Greg was laying groundwork for a soft termination. Constructive offboarding, they called it once. That week, my feedback email arrived. "Amy, we've noticed some concerns about collaboration and visibility. Greg mentioned you've been resistant to new leadership direction." I stared at the screen, almost laughing. Resistant? I'd been erased. I replied politely, attaching 3 client thank you emails and a project timeline showing I'd hit every deadline early. No response. The following Friday, Greg cornered me by the break room. "Don't take the feedback personally," he said, sipping his overpriced protein shake. "You just need to learn how to, share the spotlight. Leadership loves team players." He smiled as if he hadn't just stabbed me in the back and asked me to applaud. That night, I added another sheet to my file. This one was titled Behavioral Documentation, Supervisor. I logged every comment, every coaching conversation, every unexplained performance flag. I also added one more thing. A note to myself. Stay calm. Truth needs quiet to grow teeth. By December, the office was buzzing about Greg's bonus. People whispered numbers in the hallway. $800,000, $950,000, almost $1 million. He played it down, of course, but I saw the new watch, the designer briefcase, the extra bounce in his walk. I was sitting 2 desks away when his assistant congratulated him. He laughed and said, "All those late nights paid off." We crushed Q4 late nights. Mine. That was when I started building the list. I opened a new Word document. Simpler, easier to print. The first line read, Client Impact Summary, Q4, prepared by Amy R., original author. Under each client, I wrote a short paragraph describing my contributions, clear, factual, supported by timestamps and file paths. For each project, I noted the first date of contact, the email sent, and the key deliverables. It wasn't revenge. It was insurance. Still, as the list grew, I couldn't help but notice how neatly it mirrored Greg's strategic vision report. Word for word in some sections. He hadn't even changed the phrasing. He'd stolen not just credit, but my voice. One evening, while finalizing numbers for Vection Labs, I got a message from the client's VP. "Amy, really appreciate your clarity during today's call. You make this stuff easy to trust." That line stuck with me. Easy to trust. I realized that was the one thing Greg couldn't steal. Relationships. My clients didn't trust him. They trusted me. So I started quietly checking in. Nothing dramatic. A few messages here and there. Just confirming you received the updated onboarding plan. Let me know if there's anything we can improve next quarter. Polite, professional. Each reply confirmed what I already knew. They saw me as the real face of their success. That's when I understood the real leverage I held. Numbers can be manipulated, credit can be stolen. But loyalty? That's earned. And Greg had none of it. By mid-December, my client impact summary stretched 12 pages long. I printed it once. Clean, formatted, signed. Then slid it into a folder and locked it in my desk drawer. The label read, Q4 deliverables, internal. If anyone saw it, they'd assume it was just another report. But to me, it was something else entirely. It was the first quiet step toward freedom. The moment I decided I wasn't waiting for recognition anymore, I was preparing for justice. By January, Greg's smile had become sharper, thinner, like a knife someone forgot to wash. The office buzzed with New Year optimism, resolutions, and endless talk about Q1 growth projections. But beneath the fake energy, I could sense something shifting. The HR director started dropping by my desk more often. The CFO's assistant suddenly wanted updates on project budgets I'd already submitted. And Greg? He'd begun copying leadership on every email to me, always with a faint tone of condescension. "Amy, please ensure accuracy this time. Let's not miss another deadline. Double-check your client communications, can't afford mistakes." The thing was, there were no mistakes. He was creating a paper trail. I recognized the pattern. Overwhelm, isolate, discredit. The soft layoff method. It's subtle, just enough to make you question your sanity. One misplaced comma becomes carelessness. One missed call becomes unreliability. By the time HR gets involved, they have patterns. Patterns Greg invented. That was the week I realized I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was preparing for war. If you're still here, hit that subscribe button, because what happens next is the reason you never underestimate the quiet ones. On Wednesday morning, Greg called me into his office. He was all charm. "Amy, sit down. Listen, I know last quarter was intense. Leadership's just concerned about your ability to scale with the company's future direction." Translation: "We're setting you up." He smiled, folding his hands like a benevolent mentor. "You've got great potential. You really do. You just need to work on visibility. Be more collaborative. Maybe shadow someone senior to refine your strategic approach." I almost laughed. I'd been running his strategies for 2 years. Instead, I nodded. "I understand. I'll document everything moving forward, just to be clear on performance metrics." His smile faltered for half a second. Just enough to confirm he knew what I meant. Documentation. He dismissed me, probably thinking I'd crawl away and start overperforming to prove myself. But I walked straight to the copy room, closed the door, and took out my phone. I recorded a voice note. January 12th. Greg implied performance concerns. No formal warning issued. Confirmed focus on documentation. I didn't want revenge. I wanted evidence. 2 days later, the setup escalated. Greg forwarded me an urgent client project, Vection Labs system update. The same one I'd finished weeks ago. The version he sent was incomplete, outdated. If I used it, it would make me look careless. Classic move. So I sent him a short reply. Noted. Please confirm this is the latest approved version. I'm seeing a discrepancy in file date, no accusation. Just accountability. He didn't respond. Instead, the next morning, I got an email from HR. Hi, Amy. We'd like to schedule a quick check-in about project management practices. I almost smiled. The trap had been set. Only it wasn't for me anymore. Because behind the scenes, my Northwind folder had doubled in size. Every version, every timestamp, every deleted comment, saved and mirrored. I'd even started exporting call logs and saving calendar invites, noting every instance where Greg had reassigned my meetings to himself. I was no longer scared, just patient. A week later, Greg slipped up. He was in the break room with Tyler from finance, loud as always, like the walls were his audience. Nearly $1 million bonus, he said, laughing. Not bad for a quarter that almost went sideways. Saved it with my quick thinking. Tyler asked what he meant. Greg smirked. Vection, Meridian, Atlas Core, those were mine. I rebuilt the frameworks from scratch. Amy's work just needed polish. I stood by the doorway, out of sight, pretending to read the notice board. The air around me went cold. It wasn't the lie that hurt anymore. It was how easy it came to him. That night, I backed up everything again. This time to an external hard drive I kept in my apartment safe. I printed copies of critical documents and labeled them. Client attribution. Q4 and Q1 transition. Then I did something Greg would never have expected. I reached out to an attorney. Her name was Vanessa Price, a quiet professional recommended by an ex-employee who'd left Stratos Dynamics amicably, only to later settle for a substantial sum. I met her at a small cafe downtown. She listened as I explained everything. Greg's theft of credit, the altered project decks, the false feedback loop with HR. She didn't interrupt, just took notes. When I finished, she leaned forward. Don't confront him, she said. Keep documenting. Date everything. Let them think you're compliant. They're building a case against you, but we'll build one stronger. If it goes to audit, you'll have every proof you need. Her calmness felt like oxygen. She added one more thing. Amy, when the time comes, don't shout. Just hand them the truth and walk away. Over the next 2 weeks, I followed her advice to the letter. I arrived early, stayed late, responded promptly, documented everything. And while Greg strutted through meetings with his $1 million grin, I sat quietly, taking notes, each one a thread that would eventually unravel him. He had no idea that his visibility strategy was lighting up the very trail that would expose him. By the end of January, my Northwind file wasn't just documentation. It was a mirror, one that showed exactly who Greg Steele really was when no one else was looking. And soon, the entire company would see it too. By mid-February, the office felt different. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was the tension that hums right before a storm breaks. Greg had started pacing more during meetings, barking at interns, interrupting directors. His arrogance had grown proportionally to his bonus. Everyone could see he was untouchable, or so they thought. I'd stopped reacting to his taunts weeks ago. When he joked, "Amy, try not to mix up the numbers this time," I just smiled and nodded. What he didn't know was that I had already memorized every number in his so-called visionary report. The same report I'd built, cell by cell, formula by formula. It was around that time that I received an unexpected message from an old contact, Ethan, a senior recruiter from Meridian Partners, one of our competitor firms. We'd met years ago at an industry conference. He'd always said, "If you ever get tired of making other people rich, call me." That night, I finally did. If you're still watching, you might want to stick around, because this is where quiet planning turns into something much bigger. Ethan picked up on the second ring. "Amy, been a while. What made you call?" I hesitated for only a second. "Let's just say I'm exploring options." His tone shifted. Professional now. "Understood. You still managing the Vection and Meridian accounts?" "I am," I said carefully. He paused, as if running the numbers in his head. "You're sitting on gold, Amy. How soon could you move?" "I'm not moving yet," I said. "But hypothetically, if I were, I'd want a clean exit. No noise, no mess." Ethan chuckled. "Then you came to the right person. Let's grab coffee tomorrow." The next morning, I met him at a cafe near the river, quiet enough for conversation, loud enough to blend in. He slid a folder across the table. "Here's what I can offer. Senior implementation lead, salary bump, signing bonus, and remote flexibility. What we'd need from you is simple. Relationships. You've got them. We'd give you the resources to build properly this time." He didn't need to say it. He was asking if my clients would follow. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I thought of all those nights staying up to fix Greg's errors, all the weekends I'd spent rewriting his reports, all the times he'd told me I was support staff with a smile. Finally, I said, "If I go, I won't go alone." Ethan smiled. "That's what I hoped you'd say." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and a glass of red wine beside it. The apartment was quiet, except for the soft hum of the heater and the occasional city noise outside. I opened a new spreadsheet. Local only, no company drive this time. Title: Exit Blueprint. First column, client name. Second, account value. Third, relationship strength, 1 to 10. Fourth, transition risk, low, medium, high. I started listing them. Vection Labs, 9 out of 10. The VP still used templates I'd built last year. Meridian Biotech, 8 out of 10. The CEO had called me directly for updates when Greg was unavailable. Atlas Core, 7 out of 10. Some loyalty to Greg, but mostly convenience. I highlighted the ones that mattered in green. The clients who trusted me, not the company. When I finished, I leaned back and stared at the document. It wasn't revenge. It was truth in spreadsheet form. For the first time in months, I felt calm. The next week, Greg started dropping more hints. "So, Amy," he said during one team meeting, "leadership's been talking about structural changes." Just so you're not surprised if things shift, I knew that tone. It was the prelude to elimination. He was setting me up for a performance-based transition, probably already drafting the justification email. I nodded. "Good to know, Greg. Thanks for the transparency." He smiled, clearly pleased with himself. But 2 hours later, I sent a different kind of email. From my personal account to myself. Summary of February 17th team meeting. Greg referenced potential structural changes affecting my role. No documented concerns or performance issues on record. Vanessa, my attorney, had taught me that trick. "If it's not written down, it doesn't exist," she'd said. And every time Greg thought he was playing chess, I was quietly writing the rulebook. By March, Ethan sent over the official offer. 6-figure base, performance bonus, and most importantly, a signing bonus that matched 3 months of my salary. I read the letter 3 times, then whispered to myself, "It's time." I signed digitally, closed my laptop, and exhaled. The next step was clear. I would leave cleanly, professionally, with documentation so solid it could survive a forensic audit. I began preparing my final package. The client impact summary, the one Greg had stripped my name from months ago. Only this time, I made sure every contribution, timestamp, and email chain was included. I formatted it neatly, printed it on company letterhead, and titled it, Client Transition Overview. Amy Roberts. It looked harmless, professional, routine. But inside that document was every inconsistency that tied Greg's $1 million bonus to my work. I placed it in a blue folder, sealed it with a paperclip, and slipped it into my desk drawer. On the front, in small, neat letters, I wrote 3 words: for HR delivery. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. For once, I didn't dread going in, because I wasn't walking into Greg's world anymore. I was walking out of it. And when I did, the truth would walk out with me. The morning Greg got his $980,000 bonus, he showed up an hour late, sunglasses on, holding a latte like a trophy. The office buzzed with fake congratulations. Someone had brought cupcakes. HR had sent out an email calling him a model of leadership and innovation. I watched from my desk, typing the final lines of my resignation letter. No speech, no drama, just one clean paragraph. Please accept this as my formal resignation, effective 2 weeks from today. Thank you for the opportunity. I printed it, signed my name, and placed it into the blue folder I'd prepared, the same one holding my client transition overview. At 10:15 a.m., Greg strutted into my cubicle area, flashing that smug grin that never reached his eyes. Amy, quick update. Vection wants the revised implementation by end of week. Make sure it's flawless, yeah? I looked up, smiled politely. Of course, Greg. But you'll need to reassign it. I won't be here next week. His grin faltered. Sorry? I stood, folder in hand. I'm resigning. Effective immediately. HR has the notice and documentation. For a moment, he just blinked, trying to process what I'd said. Then he laughed, loudly, mockingly. You're quitting? Right after we hit record numbers? Bad timing, Amy. Not a smart move for your career, I smiled back. Maybe. Or maybe perfect timing. And with that, I walked to HR. If you've made it this far, you'll want to stay till the end. Because what happened next proved one simple truth. Paperwork has more power than pride. Jill from HR looked up when I entered her office. She tried to smile, but it faltered when she saw the folder. I just wanted to submit this, I said, placing it neatly on her desk. She flipped it open, expecting a routine resignation. Her eyes paused on the second document, the client transition overview. What's this? She asked. Just something to help with the handover, I said lightly. Each client file includes my contributions, communication records, and original project timelines. Might make it easier to avoid disruption. Her eyes skimmed the first few pages and her face changed. These are all Greg's clients. Greg's? I tilted my head. Or mine. I didn't need to say more. The timestamps, email chains, and notes spoke louder than I ever could. Jill excused herself. Muttering something about needing to loop in finance, I left quietly, passing Greg's office on the way out. He was laughing into his headset again, probably bragging about his leadership results. He didn't even look up as I walked by. The next morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table with coffee when my phone buzzed. It was a message from a former coworker. What did you do? CFO just called an emergency audit. Something about client attribution and bonus validation. I didn't reply. I just sat there, sipping my coffee, while the pieces started falling exactly where they were supposed to. By noon, the updates started trickling in. Greg had been called into a closed-door meeting with the CFO, 2 members of legal, and HR. The door had stayed shut for nearly an hour. By 1, people said the CFO's voice could be heard down the hallway. Explain why these deliverables list your name when the metadata shows Amy Roberts as the author. Someone else claimed the CFO had slammed a folder on the table, the one I'd left behind. Greg apparently went pale. At 3 o'clock, my phone rang again. It was Ethan from Meridian Partners. You're trending, Amy, he said, half joking. Industry grapevine says Stratus Dynamics just froze an executive bonus pending review. That wouldn't happen to be connected to you, would it? I laughed softly. I just left a folder. Remind me never to get on your bad side, he said. That evening, another message arrived, this time from Debbie, my main contact at Vection Labs. Heard you've moved on, Amy. Congratulations. If your new company's open to collaborations, we'd love to continue working with you. And then another one from Meridian Biotech. Let us know your new business email. We'd prefer to keep consistency with you handling our account. 3 clients reached out within 24 hours. Greg's empire was already cracking. 2 days later, Stratos Dynamics issued an internal memo. Following discrepancies in Q4 reporting, the executive board has initiated an independent review of performance-based compensation. Until further notice, all Q4 bonuses are suspended. I didn't need to read between the lines. Greg's $980,000 leadership award had just turned into a liability. A former coworker texted later that week. He's out. Security escorted him from the building. Legal's involved. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. My first day at Meridian Partners came quietly. No celebration, no victory lap. Just a new office, a new start. And peace. During lunch, Ethan stopped by my desk. You settling in? Yeah, I said, smiling. Feels good to work somewhere that actually values integrity. He grinned. By the way, those Vection and Meridian accounts? They're officially onboarded. I nodded, hiding the satisfaction that warmed through me. Later that afternoon, I opened my email. At the top of my inbox was a message from an unknown sender. You didn't have to do that. No name, but I didn't need one. I recognized Greg's style. Condescending, defensive. I typed back a single line. Leadership's not really for men like you. Then I deleted his message and emptied my trash folder. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with noise or applause. Sometimes it's just quiet correction. Truth unfolding exactly the way it should. Greg had taught me one thing. Arrogance blinds people. But integrity? It sees everything. And when it's time, it speaks. My name is Mandy Pierce, and I will never forget the moment my manager told me that my husband's life didn't matter. It was a gray Wednesday morning, the kind of day where the rain looks tired before it even hits the ground. I was standing in the staff break room of Halpern Logistics, clutching my phone so tightly my knuckles went white. The nurse on the other end had just said words that made my body go cold. He's critical. You need to come now. My husband Daniel had collapsed at work. Massive heart attack. He was 42, the kind of man who still jogged in the morning and believed he'd live to 90. I burst into my manager's office. Mark, it's Daniel, I said, breathless. He's in the hospital. They don't know if he'll make it. I need the week off. Mark looked up from his computer, slowly, like I'd interrupted him while he was trying to solve world peace. You know we're short-staffed, he said flatly. Work comes first, Mandy. Cover your shift or don't come back. For a moment, I actually thought I'd misheard him. The company had preached about family values in every meeting. They gave speeches about loyalty, teamwork, empathy. But when I stood there, shaking, desperate, Mark didn't even blink. Mark, he's my husband, I whispered. He sighed, leaned back in his chair, and said, We all have personal problems. I can't set a precedent for special treatment. Something inside me cracked. I'd worked there for 9 years. No sick days, no late arrivals, no complaints. I'd covered for others when they partied, volunteered for double shifts, even worked holidays. I had given that company everything. And in return, I was disposable. Before I could respond, he added, If you walk out that door, consider it your resignation. I didn't walk out. I ran. The drive to the hospital blurred by in a haze of rain, red lights, and silent prayers. When I finally reached the emergency wing, Daniel was lying there surrounded by machines that beeped in mechanical rhythm. A fragile reminder he was still alive. He was pale, tubes snaking from his arms. The doctors told me he'd made it through surgery, but the next 48 hours would decide everything. I didn't leave his side. For 6 days, I lived in that hospital. I ate from vending machines, washed my face in public sinks, and slept in the hard plastic chair next to his bed. I texted my team to explain what happened, but no one replied. The silence from work felt deafening. On the morning of the 7th day, Daniel finally opened his eyes. His voice was weak, barely more than a whisper. "You look exhausted," he said. "You should go home." I smiled through tears. Home can wait. But when I finally did go home that evening, I found an email waiting in my inbox. Subject: termination notice. Body: failure to appear for scheduled shifts without prior approval constitutes job abandonment. Your employment with Halpern Logistics has been terminated effective immediately. I stared at the screen, the words bleeding into each other. Job abandonment. As if caring for the man who'd nearly died was some kind of crime. I wanted to scream. But instead, I just sat there. Quiet. Empty. The way you feel when the last piece of something you believed in shatters. The next week was survival mode. Daniel was recovering slowly. The medical bills were stacking up, and I had no income. I started applying for new jobs, but word spreads fast in logistics. Apparently, Mark had told people I was unreliable, that I disappeared during a critical week. Every email rejection hit harder than the last. But life has a way of testing how much a person can take before they change. One afternoon, while Daniel was resting, I went through our mailbox and found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a short typewritten note. "If you want the truth about Halpern Logistics, look in storage unit 307. No signature. No explanation. At first, I thought it was a prank, until I saw the small company logo, watermark faintly visible behind the text. The same logo printed on my old employee badge. My pulse quickened. I hadn't even told anyone I'd been fired yet. Who could have sent this? I told myself to ignore it. I needed to focus on Daniel, on rebuilding, on peace. But at night, lying awake, listening to his soft breathing, my mind kept circling back to that note. The truth about Halpern Logistics. I'd worked there nearly a decade. What truth could I possibly not know? By the third night, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove across town to the self-storage facility listed on the envelope. The air was heavy with rain again, like the day everything began. Unit 307 was near the back, half hidden under a flickering light. My hands trembled as I entered the code and pulled the metal door upward. Inside were boxes, dozens of them, neatly stacked and labeled. On the top of one was a folder marked Payroll Records, 2020 to 2024. Curiosity turned to dread as I flipped it open. The numbers didn't make sense. Employee deductions that never appeared on pay stubs, payments to non-existent workers, names I didn't recognize. My heart pounded as realization crept in. Halpern Logistics wasn't just a toxic workplace. It was hiding something far worse. I didn't know it yet, but uncovering what was in those boxes would bring the FBI, the CEO, and the ghosts of my company's lies straight to my doorstep. And the man who once told me work comes first would soon wish he had never spoken those words. Because by the time this was over, I wouldn't just expose the truth. I'd redefine what justice really means. The smell of damp cardboard and dust hit me the moment I stepped into storage unit 307. The air felt heavy, stale, like the place hadn't been opened in years. My phone flashlight cut across rows of labeled boxes stacked with military precision, each one marked with dates, department codes, and red stamps that read confidential. My pulse quickened. Whoever sent me here knew exactly what I'd find. The top box was labeled Payroll Records, 2020 to 2024. I opened it carefully, half expecting rats to jump out. Inside were thick binders, USB drives, and folders stuffed with printouts of spreadsheets. Every document bore Halpern's corporate header. I recognized some names: warehouse workers, shift supervisors, even people from the administrative office. But there were also names I didn't recognize at all. Hundreds of them. Each employee supposedly receiving bi-weekly deposits, except the bank accounts listed were identical. My stomach turned. Fake employees, duplicate accounts, funds being funneled somewhere. I flipped deeper into the files and found internal memos signed by Mark Lanning, my former manager. His signature was everywhere: payroll authorizations, overtime approvals, even termination requests. But the handwriting wasn't his. Someone had forged his name on at least half of them. I snapped a few photos with my phone, my hands trembling. If this was what I thought it was, Halpern wasn't just mishandling money, they were committing large-scale payroll fraud. A noise outside made me freeze. Footsteps. I killed my flashlight and held my breath. A shadow passed across the thin gap under the door. For a few long seconds, the footsteps paused right outside, then slowly moved away. I waited another full minute before exhaling and slipping out of the unit. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. By the time I reached my car, rain had started to fall again. Steady, cold, and relentless. I sat in the driver's seat staring at the photos on my phone. My husband was still recovering at home. I should have gone back to him. But the part of me that had spent years being ignored and belittled refused to stop now. Halpern Logistics had fired me for abandonment. Maybe it was time they learned what real abandonment felt like, when every secret they buried came clawing to the surface. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up cross-referencing what I'd found with old pay stubs I'd kept in a drawer. The deductions never added up. Even my own pay had discrepancies: overtime hours missing, insurance fees double-charged. At 2 a.m., I realized what those duplicate accounts meant. Someone was laundering company money through ghost employees, and whoever managed payroll was involved. I thought of Mark again. The man who'd told me work came first. The one who threatened to ruin my career. Maybe this was his game. Maybe he was protecting more than just schedules when he refused my leave. The next morning, I drove to the hospital cafeteria to see Daniel. He looked stronger, color returning to his cheeks, though he could see the exhaustion etched into mine. "Mandy," he said softly, "whatever you're doing, stop before it consumes you." I hesitated. "If you saw what I saw, you wouldn't sleep either." He reached for my hand. "They already took your job. Don't let them take your peace too." But peace felt impossible. I spent the next 3 days gathering proof. I went back to the storage unit twice, photographing files, scanning documents into my laptop. Each visit made me more anxious. I kept thinking someone was following me. A white sedan seemed to appear wherever I parked. Same dented bumper, same cracked taillight. By the third day, I knew I couldn't handle this alone. I decided to contact someone who'd left Halpern last year. Evan Ross, an accountant I'd worked with in payroll. He'd always seemed uncomfortable around Mark, like he knew more than he could say. When I called, Evan sounded startled. "Mandy? You shouldn't be calling me. I found something," I said. "Files. Payroll records that don't make sense." There was a pause long enough to make me think the line had gone dead. Then, quietly, he said, "Where did you get them?" "Storage Unit 307. Another pause. "Mandy, listen carefully. Don't tell anyone else. Halpern's been under federal review for months. The FBI's involved. They're investigating Mark and others for embezzlement. That storage unit? It's evidence the world tilted." "Evidence? Then why would someone send me there?" "I don't know," he said urgently. "But if you took anything, you need to put it back." Immediately, I looked at the flash drive sitting beside my laptop. My chest tightened. "It's too late for that." "Mandy," he said, voice sharp now, "you have no idea what you're mixed up in. Return it, or you'll end up in the middle of a federal case." Before I could reply, the line went dead. That night, someone knocked on my apartment door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I peered through the peephole. No one was there. But tucked into the doorframe was another envelope. Inside was a single printed sentence. "You shouldn't have opened those boxes." No signature. No explanation. I closed every curtain in the apartment and sat beside Daniel's hospital bed, clutching his hand like it could anchor me. He was asleep, unaware of the storm brewing outside our fragile calm. Whoever sent the first note wanted me to find the truth. Whoever sent this one wanted me to stop. And deep down, I already knew I wouldn't. Because Halpern Logistics hadn't just fired me. They'd built their empire on lies, and someone thought I was too small to matter. But they were about to learn. When you push a person to the edge, sometimes they don't fall. They rise. And when I returned to that company a week later, everything would explode. Because the CEO and the FBI would already be waiting for me. When my phone rang at 7:12 on Monday morning, I almost didn't answer. The caller ID showed Halpern Logistics, corporate office. For a full minute, I just stared at the screen. Part of me wanted to throw the phone across the room, but curiosity, or maybe defiance, made me swipe accept. A calm voice spoke. "Mrs. Pierce, this is Dana Reeves, assistant to CEO Alan Halpern. Mr. Halpern has requested to meet with you today regarding an internal matter. 10 a.m., corporate headquarters." My throat tightened. I don't work there anymore. Her tone didn't change. "Mr. Halpern insists this is important. It would be in your best interest to attend." Before I could ask anything else, she hung up. I stared at the phone, a sick feeling crawling up my spine. Daniel was still recovering, and I didn't want to leave him, but something told me this meeting wasn't optional. I didn't know it yet, but that single phone call would change everything. By 10 sharp, I was walking through the glass doors of Halpern Logistics for the first time since being fired. The receptionist's smile faltered when she saw me. "They're expecting you," she said quietly, pointing toward the conference wing. The building felt different. Too quiet. Too polished. The kind of silence that means everyone's holding their breath. When I pushed open the conference room door, 2 men in dark suits were already seated across from Alan Halpern, the CEO himself. I recognized one of the men immediately. Special Agent Carter, FBI. The other introduced himself as Agent Morales. "Mrs. Pierce," Halpern said, gesturing to the empty chair opposite him. "Thank you for coming." My voice wavered. "You fired me by email. Why am I here?" He clasped his hands together. "Because your name has come up in an active federal investigation." The words hit me like ice water. "What?" Agent Carter slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed photos of me entering storage unit 307, me loading boxes into my car, me walking out under the dim yellow lights. The timestamp glowed on every corner. "How did you—" "Security footage," Carter said calmly. "The unit belongs to Halpern Logistics. It was sealed under an FBI warrant 6 weeks ago. You broke into an evidence site, my breath caught." "I didn't break in. Someone sent me a note." Morales leaned forward. "We know. We found both letters in your mailbox. Fingerprint analysis shows they were typed and handled with gloves." I swallowed hard. "Then you know someone set me up." Halpern's expression was unreadable. "That depends on what you did with the materials you took." I hesitated. Lying wasn't an option. "I photographed some files and copied one flash drive. I didn't know it was evidence." Carter's jaw tightened. "That flash drive contains payroll data directly tied to a $14.8 million embezzlement scheme. You could be facing obstruction of justice charges." The room spun. "You can't be serious." "I lost my job because of that company, because your manager refused to let me see my dying husband." My voice cracked. "You're telling me I'm the criminal?" Carter's tone softened slightly. "We're not saying that yet." "But we need the drive." I reached into my bag with shaking hands and slid it across the table. "Take it. I don't want anything to do with this." Morales picked it up carefully, gloved, and placed it in an evidence pouch. Halpern leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Pierce, Mark Lanning no longer works here. He was arrested last night." My heart stopped. "Arrested? For what?" "Wire fraud, tax evasion, racketeering," Carter said. "Your photos from that unit were the missing link. Without knowing it, you gave us the last piece of the puzzle." I sat there, speechless. The anger I'd carried for weeks The humiliation, the fear, it all twisted into confusion. Then why call me in like a suspect? Halpern folded his hands again. Because we needed to confirm whether you were involved willingly. And because someone inside our company deliberately led you to that storage unit. We need to know who I thought of the first envelope, the watermark, the faint impression of the Halpern logo. Someone with access to corporate stationery had sent it. My mind replayed every conversation I'd had at the company, every uneasy glance, every hushed hallway whisper. Then a memory clicked. Evan Ross, the accountant who'd warned me over the phone, the one who'd told me the FBI was already investigating. He'd quit right before things started unraveling. Evan, I whispered. It has to be him. Morales nodded slowly. That name's already on our radar. He disappeared last week, along with nearly $500,000 in unaccounted transfers. We believe he tried to shift blame onto others before fleeing. So the note wasn't meant to expose corruption. It was bait. Evan had used me as a pawn, knowing my anger would lead me straight to the evidence, leaving my fingerprints all over the scene. Carter slid a business card toward me. We may need your testimony once the case proceeds. Until then, don't discuss this with anyone. And if you receive any more messages, contact us immediately. I nodded numbly and stood to leave. Halpern stopped me at the door. Mrs. Pierce, I know words mean little now, but I'm sorry. What happened with Mark was inexcusable. If you ever consider coming back... I turned slowly. Coming back? My voice was steady now, colder. You built a company where empathy meant weakness, where loyalty only went one way. You don't need me back. You need to rebuild your conscience. Halpern looked down, and for the first time, I saw shame flicker across his face. When I stepped outside, the autumn air hit sharp and cold. Reporters were already gathering near the entrance, shouting questions about arrests and investigations. I kept walking. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. You weren't supposed to talk to them. No signature, no number trace. The text vanished seconds later, deleted remotely. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. The FBI might think Evan was gone, but someone else was still watching, and somehow I had just become the center of a storm that was far from over. The night after the FBI meeting, I couldn't stop shaking. I kept replaying everything in my head. The photos, the flash drive, the text that had deleted itself. Whoever sent that message wasn't done with me. Daniel was home from the hospital now, still weak but slowly improving. His skin had color again, his humor was returning, and he kept trying to convince me to sleep. Whatever they're dragging you into, Mandy, it's not worth it, he said, resting a hand on mine. Let the FBI handle it. I can't, I whispered. Someone wanted me blamed for this. I need to know who and why, he sighed, squeezing my fingers. Then promise me one thing. Don't do it alone. I promised. I meant it when I said it. But by morning, that promise was already broken. At 9 a.m., my phone buzzed again. A new email. No sender name, just a single line of text. You want answers? Check locker 112 at the Westfield bus terminal. I stared at it for a long moment, my pulse quickening. Evan was gone. The FBI thought he'd fled with stolen money, but if he was still around, this was his way of communicating. Indirect, untraceable. I told Daniel I had to run errands. He looked suspicious but didn't press. He'd been through enough. The Westfield terminal was crowded, people rushing between platforms, luggage wheels squeaking on the tiles. I found locker 112 easily. The combination, 3179, was scribbled on the inside of the email. I entered it, half expecting nothing. The locker opened with a metallic click. Inside was a single manila envelope and a cheap prepaid phone. My heart thudded as I opened the envelope. Inside were copies of wire transfer receipts, each stamped with Halpern Logistics headers. But the signatures didn't belong to Mark or Evan. They were signed by Alan Halpern himself. For a second, my breath caught. The CEO. The same man who'd looked me in the eye and apologized yesterday. Attached to one receipt was a handwritten note. Mark took the fall. Halpern runs everything. They'll bury the truth before the FBI sees it. Don't trust anyone. My first instinct was disbelief. Maybe Evan was lying to save himself? But the receipts looked real, complete with digital authorizations. One transfer led to a shell account in the Cayman Islands. Another to a company registered under a fake name that I recognized. The same supplier I used to process invoices for. The CEO wasn't innocent. He was orchestrating the fraud. My stomach turned as realization sank in. The entire FBI narrative that Mark and Evan were responsible was only half true. They were pawns, and Halpern was the one holding the board. I pocketed the prepaid phone and envelope and left the station as calmly as I could. But as I approached my car, a black sedan pulled up behind me. The windows were tinted, engine idling. A voice called from the driver's seat. "Mrs. Pierce?" I froze. The door opened and Agent Carter stepped out, holding up his badge. "We need to talk." He gestured for me to sit in the back seat. "You've been busy," he said quietly, setting the envelope on his lap. "We've been monitoring your digital activity. We know you were at the terminal." I stared at him, speechless. "How?" "We traced the burner email. Whoever sent it is still in the city, and they want you involved." Carter opened the envelope, glancing through the receipts. "These are serious accusations. But if this is real, Halpern could face decades in prison. Did you know he withdrew $2.7 million in personal consulting bonuses last quarter?" My voice came out barely above a whisper. "So it's true." Carter nodded grimly. "We suspected it. But these documents give us probable cause. What we don't know is how he's moving the funds now that we've frozen his accounts." I looked at the prepaid phone. Maybe that's why Evan contacted me. Carter studied me for a moment. "Mrs. Pierce, whoever's feeding you this information is playing a dangerous game. You could get hurt." Before I could answer, his phone buzzed. He answered, listening silently for a few seconds, then his face changed. "What hospital?" he asked sharply. My heart dropped. "What happened?" He ended the call and looked at me. "Your husband was just admitted to County General. Someone broke into your apartment." I don't remember the drive to the hospital. I just remember the smell of antiseptic and the sound of my own heartbeat roaring in my ears. Daniel was conscious but shaken. A bruise was forming along his temple. "They were looking for something," he said weakly. "They kept asking where you were." I felt my knees buckle. "Who?" He shook his head. "Didn't say. Just 2 men, suits, quiet voices. They left when I said I didn't know anything." I turned to Carter, who'd followed me in. His jaw was tight. "This isn't just about corporate fraud anymore. Someone's trying to silence witnesses." He placed a protective detail outside Daniel's room and told me to go somewhere safe. But I couldn't. I sat by Daniel's bed all night, gripping his hand, watching every shadow that passed the doorway. Around 2 a.m., his eyes fluttered open. "You can stop now, Mandy," he murmured. "Let it go." I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But I thought of the men who'd broken into our home, of Halpern sitting behind his glass desk pretending to care, of every worker whose paycheck had been stolen to fund his empire. Let it go? Number, not yet. By morning, I had made my decision. If Halpern thought firing me had erased my worth, if he thought fear would keep me quiet, he'd miscalculated. I still had the prepaid phone, and one unread message blinked on the screen. "If you want proof, meet me tomorrow." 6 p.m., Riverside parking lot. Come alone, I looked at Daniel sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks, then whispered to myself, "For both of us. This ends tomorrow." I didn't know if it would bring justice or destroy everything I had left. But I was going to find out who sent that message, even if it was the last thing I ever did. The next evening, I sat in my car at the Riverside parking lot, watching the sun sink below the highway bridge, The air smelled of gasoline and rain. Every instinct in me screamed that this was a trap, but I couldn't ignore it. Too many lies, too many people hurt. At 6:04 p.m., a gray sedan pulled into the far corner and idled for a moment before the driver stepped out. My heart stopped when I saw his face. Evan Ross. He looked nothing like the neat accountant I remembered. His beard was grown out, dark circles shadowed his eyes, and he wore a cheap jacket that didn't fit. He glanced around nervously, then approached my car. I rolled down the window just enough to speak. "You're supposed to be gone." "I didn't steal that money, Mandy," he said quickly. "Halpern set me up. I took copies of everything to protect myself. The FBI doesn't know the half of it." I opened the door slowly. "You're the one who sent the notes?" He nodded. "I needed someone they wouldn't suspect to find the files. You were perfect. Fired, angry, invisible to them, I felt a sting in my chest. You used me. I'm sorry," he said. "But you have to understand. Halpern's still moving money through shell companies under different names. The FBI froze what they found, but he's already rebuilt the network overseas. I have proof. Emails, wire transfers, private ledgers. It's enough to take him down for good." He handed me a flash drive. "This is everything. Get it to Agent Carter." I took it, staring at the small piece of plastic that suddenly felt heavier than the car itself. "Why me?" "Because they already think you're involved," he said. "You're the only one who can walk in there without raising alarms." Before I could respond, headlights flared across the lot. A black SUV rolled in fast, tires splashing through puddles. Evan's face drained of color. "It's him," he whispered. The driver's door opened, and Alan Halpern stepped out, flanked by two men in suits. He wasn't supposed to be here. The FBI had frozen his accounts, stripped his authority. But the look on his face told me power like his didn't fade overnight. "Well," Halpern said, his voice smooth as ever. The runaway accountant and the disgraced employee. What a reunion, Evan stepped forward. "It's over, Alan. The files are out. You can't hide anymore." Halpern smirked. "You think I'd come here without knowing exactly what you've done? The FBI isn't after me anymore. They're after you, and she," he pointed at me, "is a convenient witness they can't trust." Two men moved closer. Evan tensed. "Run," he muttered. I froze. "I'm not leaving you." He shoved me toward my car. "Now." Gunshots shattered the air. I ducked behind the door as Evan hit the ground. The sound echoed off the concrete walls, drowning in the rain. Halpern shouted something, but I couldn't hear over the ringing in my ears. I didn't think. I just ran. I hit the ignition, tires squealing, heart hammering. In the rearview mirror, I saw Evan lying motionless, Halpern's men dragging him toward the SUV. My mind screamed to stop, to help him, but survival took over. I drove straight to the FBI field office, engine still running when I jumped out. Security tried to stop me, but I yelled for Agent Carter, waving the flash drive like it was a lifeline. Within minutes, I was in a small interrogation room, soaked, shaking, explaining everything. Carter listened silently as technicians plugged in the drive. Rows of encrypted spreadsheets filled the screen. Offshore accounts, fake invoices, private transfers, all signed by Alan Halpern. Carter's eyes widened. "This is it," he said. "This is what we needed." He radioed his team. Within an hour, federal agents were swarming Halpern's estate. By midnight, news outlets reported his arrest. Charges: fraud, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and attempted homicide. Evan's body was found near the riverbank. He hadn't survived. When they told me, I just sat there, numb. The man who dragged me into this mess had died trying to end it. And the man who'd built an empire on stolen wages was finally behind bars. Weeks passed. Daniel recovered slowly. Physically first, emotionally later. The night I told him it was over, he just pulled me close and whispered, "You did what they never expected. You fought back." Halpern pleaded guilty months later after the FBI traced over 20 shell corporations to his personal accounts. His sentence: 40 years in federal prison. I attended the sentencing quietly from the back row. When he was led away in cuffs, our eyes met for a brief second. There was no rage, no triumph, just the hollow realization that greed had destroyed him long before the law did. Evan's flash drive had contained something else, too. A note hidden in the final folder. If you make it out, don't waste this. Use it for good. I couldn't forget those words. Using the settlement money I received as a whistleblower, I helped start a small organization, a legal fund for employees wrongfully terminated or exploited by their companies. We called it the Pierce Initiative. I hired former Halpern workers who'd lost their jobs when the company collapsed. Our first case? A warehouse manager fired after asking for time off to care for his sick mother. I didn't need to think twice. We'll represent him, I told my team. No one should ever have to choose between family and a paycheck. Sometimes I still wake up at night hearing the echo of those gunshots, seeing Evan's face, remembering the rain-soaked parking lot. But when I look at Daniel sleeping peacefully beside me, I remind myself why I did it. Because justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet promise kept. To the people who believed they didn't matter. Mark is still serving his sentence. Halpern's empire is gone. And the same woman they called unreliable now fights for workers across the country. Maybe revenge isn't about destroying someone else. Maybe it's about rebuilding what they tried to break inside you. For me, it started with a simple choice: to walk out that door. And it ended with something I never expected: peace.